Welcome to Sports Rule Pod. I'm Nick Elam. Here we explore innovations in sports and the journeys of individuals who make sports great. Season 1 episodes are released every 2 weeks on Friday mornings. In today's interview segment, we're joined by Eric Collins, who is the play-by-play voice of the Charlotte Hornets and NBA on Prime. In the innovation segment, we explore choose your own adventure playoffs in various sports, where the top teams would be able to choose their playoff matchups rather than being locked in to a certain place in the playoff bracket based on seed. And in the next to last segment, we revisit the next to last at-bat of the 2014 World Series. There are many ways to find the podcast. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you like to find your podcasts. We encourage you to like and subscribe, but also there are ways to engage with the podcast by email, nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com or X or Instagram at sportsrulepod. And that is a way for you to submit your own innovative ideas to the podcast. As the show goes on, many episodes will be dedicated to scrutinizing the innovative ideas, rule changes, or other types of innovations for sports submitted by you. Let's get to it. We are delighted to be joined by Eric Collins, the play-by-play voice of the Charlotte Hornets since 2015, and also a member of the NBA on Prime broadcast team since 2025. Eric, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Hey, Nick, my pleasure. I hope this goes well and goes even better with an Elam Ending, because everything goes better with an Elam Ending.
Well, thank you for your kind words. Before we get into basketball, let's talk a little bit about your opportunity to broadcast an NFL game for the first time in 2025. What was the major takeaway from that experience? Anything that you learned from that first opportunity to do an NFL game?
It was awesome. Total bucket list type of thing. You know, NFL is kind of a different kind of thing. I've done a lot of college football over the years. I've literally done hundreds of college football games. But an opportunity to the NFL was just, I didn't think it was ever going to happen. And because of the way that everything kind of shifted out this year with Fox and postseason baseball, and announcers had to go from one crew to the next. I was supposed to be working a college football game that week. Actually, my crew was going to be off. That was the first week we were off. So I didn't have a game. So everyone in Fox knew that I had the week off, and they said, hey, oh, by the way, if we happen to have a game come available, would you want to do it? I said, yeah, sure, sounds great. And so I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it just so happened that when they had the opening, the game that was available was here in town. It was the Dolphins against the Panthers, and it could have been Minnesota versus Seattle, but it happened to be in my own backyard, and it just put me over the moon. I didn't find out officially until probably Monday morning for that game, that for that week, that I was going to do it. So it's kind of a lot of heavy lifting and prepping, but I've got 50 years of NFL prep right there. I watch everything and read everything, and so it was a blast. It was everything I wanted and more. Intense though. It's amazing how different the preparation is for a college football game as opposed to an NFL game. I did my same prep, but in terms of the external forces, in terms of the media availabilities, in terms of the meetings, in terms of all these other things that come with the NFL, everything was ratcheted up. So that was kind of an eye-opener, but all enjoyable.
From a nerves standpoint, was it better to find out on short notice the way you did, or would you have rather had a little more time to prep?
You know what? It kind of the point in my career where, no, it wouldn't have made a difference at all. I can think the anticipation, if I had known 2 weeks or 2 months before, the anticipation of it and thinking about it on and on. But in terms of nerves, in terms of being able to get ready for the game, it's old hat at this point. I still have a little bit of nerves, which is always great. But it wasn't anything that was out of the ordinary or crippling by a stretch of imagination. That was all good with 6 days' notice.
Now, shifting to basketball, your bread and butter, the Eric Collins of 2025, how is Eric Collins different compared to the Eric Collins of 2015 starting out as the voice of the Charlotte Hornets?
Well, there's a couple of things. That inherently, I firmly believe that announcers always get better until something happens and you don't get better. But there's no such thing as an announcer who is 25 who will not be a better announcer when they're 40. I just firmly believe that it's all accumulated experiences, things that you've seen, understanding the history of the nuance. So I'm obviously 11 years better, in my opinion, than I was before. But it's also, the format has changed quite a bit. When I first started, I was part of a 3-person booth. I was the play-by-play announcer, and I had 2 analysts. So physically, we were super tight and close to each other during a broadcast, which makes a difference. We eventually went down to a 2-person booth after my second year, and I think that's when my myself and my partner, Del Curry, kind of found out who we were as broadcasters and worked well together and started spreading our wings. Um, it's also, I kind of think it's like the George Costanza effect, like George Costanza, if you watch Seinfeld, was a specific guy, and he was okay, he's interesting, kind of quirky, eclectic. And then year two, he clearly got stranger. And then year four and five. And so by the end, he was almost a caricature of himself from when the first season of Seinfeld began. He kept pushing the envelope. And it's kind of the Costanza effect with our broadcast is because you're able to do 82 games and you find out what works and what doesn't work and what you like, all the things that have worked over the years, just kind of we expand on, expand on, expand on. So I do think it is a radically different broadcast just because of the confidence that I have and because my partner Dell has and the producer has, and allowing us to kind of spread our wings and continue to bloom and blossom the things that we like. So if you look back, yeah, clearly it's a different broadcast because I'm a better broadcaster now than I was in 2015, but it's also different because the freedom that we've been allowed to do has expanded so much. And so that's why we're getting a totally different broadcast. Probably 10 years from now, I can't even imagine what it's going to look like. We'll probably have to pare it down at some point.
So you've earned these exciting career opportunities. You've got this great forward momentum throughout your career and well-deserved. What is the best advice that you've received when it comes to finding these opportunities and advancing your career in broadcasting?
A great question. Well, I kind of think you really got to love it on a different level. Because this is, it's a fantastic career and I have zero regrets. But it's nights, it's weekends, it's all of your 20s kind of doing this. It's got to be your main focus. At least for me, it was. I'm a big believer that I love what I do in terms of what's not the public showing thing. I love spending 3 hours a day doing my research. This was the best part of my day yesterday. I'm getting ready for Atlanta Hawks game and just coming up with as many interesting things as I can about the Charlotte Hornets and the Atlanta Hawks. That was it for me. That got me jazzed. You got to love the work because there's times you're going to be saying no to all the things that your friends are saying yes to. Weekends at the beach, girlfriends, boyfriends, time away from family, missing holidays. People always get me like, well, geez, what are you going to do? Eric, how are you possibly working on Christmas? It's like, well, when you on Christmas, you sit down with your family, you turn on the television, you expect sports to be on there, So it's not just the people holding the microphones, it's the people like in the truck, it's the people, hauling cable, all that kind of stuff. So if you're willing to do that, if it means that much to you, if you're that into sports, heck yeah, it's a great career. But you got to understand that it's not always as glamorous and easy as it looks.
You get a front row seat to so many NBA games. Well, who is an NBA player who doesn't get the love they deserve on a national level?
Oh, well, that's a random one. Uh, Geez, like, so who is 5 years ago the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander? Because I loved Shea back then. It was so much fun to kind of understand him. I know this is super selfish, and I'm only seeing it for 26 games, but I'm telling you, man, share it with your friends. Con Knipple is a different type of player. He's just a rookie. He's only played a third of the season in Charlotte, and the Hornets haven't won a ton of games. But if you're a pure basketball fan and you like the way the game should be played, technically, he's your guy, man. If there's an open shot, it's never going to be right or left. It's either going to be short or long, and more often than not, it's in. If you get a free throw, it's freaking money. He passes not to a player, but to a spot. Like every single thing he does leads to a quality look at the basket. And he's just 20, man. He's like a young 20. So I wouldn't say he's like the greatest player out there right now, but I'm telling you, he will be a fantastic player with an unbelievable career in his future if he can stay healthy, which why not? He's strong. He loves the game. He looks the part, comes from good stock. So I guess Con Knipple would be my kind of under the radar guy right now.
Anyone who's listened to an Eric Collins game has probably noticed your wealth of knowledge, but also your exuberant style. You have taken intentional steps to try to create and maintain a unique style by not listening to the audio of any sports broadcasts when you watch them, which I think is absolutely fascinating, not only from a philosophical level, but then on a practical level. But I think about it from a logistical angle. Is it ever difficult logistically to avoid hearing the audio of sporting events on TV?
Well, I don't actively, I would never turn on a game with audio. That just doesn't happen. If I'm in a hotel room, if I'm home, it doesn't. But if I happen to be at a sports bar or something, and the game's on, I'm not going to ask the bartender to turn out the sound. So it does kind of get into my ear every once in a while. I've got two daughters. One's in high school, one's in college. And every once in a while, they'll say something to me, and it'll just like, what? Like the small things that my daughters don't know about sports, which I think that they should, because they're my offspring, and that's all I care about is sport, not all I care about. But they don't know some small little nuances, and it's because I didn't really expose them to a lot of sports. I'm not the typical, parent who sits down on a Sunday with the child next to him and having a beer and some summer sausage and watches 3 hours of football. So my girls sometimes didn't know that there's a 2 point play opportunity, or how many just small little things that they didn't know. And so I kind of feel like I've neglected my kid to a certain extent. But career wise, I think it was a great decision. I started doing minor league baseball back in the 90s, and I was also working part time in Chicago as the sideline reporter for the Chicago White Sox. And so I was listening to Hawk Harrelson every single day, and Hawk was unbelievable in terms of his talent, in terms of his uniqueness, in terms of the quality of his broadcasts. But I would listen to him for 3 hours, and then I'd go and I'd do my own games with the Schaumburg Flyers. And it was amazing how often I would say things, and he would come into my brain, and I would sound like this 70-year-old Southerner, which is what I wasn't. And so someone hit a fly ball to center field, and I said, "Oh, there's a can of corn." That was not me. That wasn't my lingo. And it would bother me for another 30 seconds that I was saying something that I knew that Hawk Harrelson would say. And I didn't want to do that. So I needed to cut that voice out of my head. And I figured the only way I can do it is stop watching broadcasts. So I don't watch broadcasts. And I think it helps multiple levels. I still watch a decent amount of sports, but I probably don't watch as much sports as other people, because I still want the excitement. I still want oh my goodness, I didn't know that was going to happen. Or, oh, wow, I didn't know he could do that. And I think maybe some people can watch a broadcast and say, well, how did he not know that? But I don't. I'd never seen Con Knipple play. Con Knipple joined the Hornets this past, whatever, he get drafted. And I was super excited. I'm at the bottom. I looked at his numbers. I knew who he was supposed to be, but I didn't know the way that he played his game. And to me, it's been really fun for the first 3 months of the season, understanding for myself and explaining it to the audience what I'm seeing in a real-time basis. So that's the reason why I choose not to listen or really even watch a ton of other sports.
Now, very early in your career journey, you covered local news in Rochester, New York. Is there anything that you miss about working in the news space?
Absolutely nothing, but I regret nothing. It was a really tough year. I was doing anything I could to get into the business. And so I just held a microphone, and I was talking to city council meeting, or talking to mayors, it's going to city council meetings. I learned how to produce, 2 minutes of content on a styrofoam cup, because the news didn't stop, man. Every single day at 12, you had to have a live shot someplace, and you're telling a story about something that you probably didn't know anything about 2 hours prior. So the confidence that it built in me was huge. To this day, when I see another announcer who spent some time in local news, I'm like, okay, you earned it here, man. You understand. And every once in a while, something will go wrong in a sporting event. Someone will get hurt, something will happen out of the ordinary, and it'll be a news story. And I do feel like I've got the chops, and I understand, okay, I'm prepared for this. Let's go. It doesn't always have to be, jokes and smiles. If something serious happens in an NBA game or during a broadcast, I feel like I've been prepared for that moment. So no regrets about local news, but it was a hard life, and I couldn't stay much longer.
Even earlier than that, you grew up in Cleveland as a Cleveland sports fan. You're still loyal to Cleveland teams. What game or development has caused you the most heartbreak as a Cleveland sports fan?
Oh, wow. Well, there wasn't a lot of heartbreak. I was first and foremost a Cleveland Indians, now Guardians fan. That was my passion. Like every single day, I knew what the score was every inning. It was always on the radio in my house. My mom would say it wasn't my dad. My dad was in my life. My dad was not a sports fan. At dinner, once a week, my mom would say, "Eric, we still have time. Let's go to the game." And so we just immediately get in the car and go down and watch the Indians play back in 1983 or whatever. But there wasn't a lot of heartbreak just because they weren't very good for my entire childhood. The biggest thing was my senior year in high school. The Cleveland Browns were very good. They were, I think, I want to say 7-1 at home. They went to the SEC championship game. This has been the '86 season. So I think it's January of '87. They lost, the Browns did, at home to John Elway on The Drive, it was called. And if you actually have a discerning eye, and you'd have like Sports Illustrated, and I think even the Sporting News. They took this wide shot of Elway's pass into the end zone to a sliding Mark Jackson, and you could see my head poking above the railing. I was like literally 8 feet away. I was in the first row of what we used to call the bleachers, now called the dog pound. But I was there looking, and 8 feet away from absolute tragedy, the Browns were that close to going to the Super Bowl, and John Elway ripped it away from us. So that would be my biggest childhood awful moment, sporting related.
So I want to make sure I understand that correctly. So the replay of this infamous play in Cleveland history, you are visible in the background of that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I have still pictures of it. I'll show it to you at some point. But yes, probably not good podcast material, but yes, there are pictures of me, clear as day, looking over this railing at this thing, Mark Jackson sliding and making a catch on what was probably the most famous play in John Elway's career, the culmination of the drive.
Sure. Now, you, as an undergrad, attended St. Lawrence University in New York. What was your favorite class when you were an undergrad?
Wow. I wasn't. I was a philosophy major, and philosophy is kind of what I kind of. My dad was a philosophy major, and I kind of wanted to be a philosophy major, and I kind of enjoyed that type of learning. But those really weren't my favorite classes. I do remember taking a class that I really liked, and it was called Rhetoric and Public Speaking. And I kind of thought that maybe I wanted to kind of get into this business. And that was fun, reading about people's speeches and, the thought process about creating a good speech and what it takes to be kind of an oral performer. That could have been my favorite class. It was a Dr. Kirk Foose who taught it. Yeah, rhetoric and social speaking. It was fantastic, though. But yeah, I read all about like Nixon's checkers speech and Martin Luther King, some of his Spanish speeches and how they're written and the thought process behind them. That really kind of stayed with me. But yeah, St. Lawrence was great. I'm definitely a product of a liberal arts education, which comes in handy every single day. Because a broadcaster, there's so many kids nowadays that think that they need to go to some kind of media school and understand how to, lug cable. Man, you need to be a person of the world, man. You need to understand, had you read, Tolstoy, what do you know about Wuthering Heights? Have you seen this particular movie? What's your cultural references? On a day-to-day basis, those are the things that help me as a broadcaster way more than understanding, the technical aspects of television and radio.
Yeah. Are you a reader on flights in your career? Or
Am I what?
Do you try to catch up on sleep, or you read books? Or do you prep when you're on flights?
There's always something that I feel is enriching on flights. So it's either reading a book. I'm currently reading Dan Brown's The Secret of Secrets. That's kind of my thing right now. But if I'm watching something, it usually is like a period piece. It's something about a portion of history that I probably didn't know as much about. I love documentaries. I don't sleep. I sleep when I get home. I will try to sleep for 10 hours. But to me, a plane is just so much opportunity to get smarter, and I usually don't waste that time. Like I don't want to waste it with something too frivolous. Like to me, learning is always so important to get better at what I do.
Now, you have a vast encyclopedic knowledge of many subjects, and including many different subjects within the sports realm. If you were to go on a show such as Sports Jeopardy, what's a niche category that that you would just dominate your opponents in Sports Jeopardy based on your knowledge?
Hometowns, high schools, colleges, I'm great. If the way my brain works, it's kind of like an associative thing. So if I ever hear something of one particular person, and like with you, Ball State, you'll always be Ball State. So whenever I look at you, it's Paris McCurdy, it's Nate Davis, it's for some reason, a young Rick Majerus. I think about all these different things associated with Ball State, the Ball Jar, Muncie, Indiana, David Letterman. That's just kind of the way I work. So I think associations with people's background, like that small portion on the bottom of everyone's bio and everything media guide you've ever seen, where it says the personal section. I don't care about what happened in the 2019 season or how many consecutive, 3-pointers this guy missed, but I want to know who else went to his high school or who his sister is, that kind of stuff. So associations is kind of my thing.
Okay, so when you look at me, you see Rick Majerus. Okay, great coach. Great coach. Your partner with the Hornets is Del Curry, who had a wonderful career in the NBA, and but also was a very good baseball player. It was drafted in baseball. You love baseball too. How often do you and Del chat about baseball?
Once every probably 2 months or so, like we'll play it. Pat Connaughton's on our team now, and Pat Connaughton has a very similar bio to Dell. Dell was drafted, I think, in the 14th round when he was at Virginia Tech as a right-handed pitcher, and Pat Connaughton was drafted in the 4th round by the Baltimore Orioles when he was at Notre Dame. So whenever there's a baseball player in the NBA or a guy who's got a baseball background, I will use those circle back and remind people that Dell was a heck of a baseball player. I went golfing with Dell a couple of years ago, and Dell clearly, a great basketball player, way better than I ever was. He clearly is a fantastic golfer. He puts it on display in all these fantastic tournaments, of course, of the year, way better than me. But we finished golfing a couple of years ago, and we go to the parking lot, and he says, "Oh, Eric, I got a surprise for you." And he opens up this trunk of his car, and he's got 2 baseball gloves. And so he throws me a glove, and he puts on a glove, and we start playing catch in the parking lot. And that's one of my huge highlights is just playing catch with my partner, Del Curry, because something special about baseball and having the glove on. So all the different things that we've done and the things that we've seen and the places we've been to, one of my best moments ever with Dell was one of my best friends. We just playing catch in a parking lot after a round of golf.
Now, in any career, including in broadcasting, you have to be able to handle humbling moments and learn from them. And in your style, your voice rises to levels that aren't possible for many human beings. Has there ever been a time where your voice let you down in an embarrassing way, your voice cracked or something like that?
Well, some of my things that people really like I'm not really super proud of the way my voice cracked. I sound like Peter Brady. But it is what it is. I think honest mistakes, I wouldn't call it a mistake, but just someone told me, my mentor when I was in Chicago when I was a kid, when I wanted to get into television news, there's a news anchor named Warner Saunders who meant so much to me. Warner was just the most regal, fantastic human being. And he taught me so much about life in this business. And one of the pearls that stays with me is he says, "Eric, people will always resonate more with honest mistakes. They don't understand cruel perfection." I was like, okay. And I've kind of based my career on that. There's a lot of different things. I'm talking extemporaneously for sometimes up to 3 hours. And sometimes my voice cracks. And sometimes, I mix metaphors. There was a time a couple of years ago, Jason Tatum was playing for the Celtics, and he's playing against the Hornets, and he's playing here in Charlotte. And he had 47 points. End of the game, the Celtics were leading by 15. It was over. The only reason why Tatum was still in the game was he wanted to get 50. So he's coming down the floor, and I'm just saying, okay, guys, everyone knows he's going to shoot the ball. And I tried to describe what I wanted to say. And I said, the Hornets need to put every single guy on them. And I said, the Hornets need to put all their eggs on Jason Tatum. It's kind of a mix of all their eggs in one basket type of thing. But at the time, that's the only thing that came out. Anyway, as I was saying, they need to put all their eggs on Jason Tatum. He shot the ball and he made 3, and I just was disgusted, and you heard my voice. But people really liked it, and it resonated with people. But if you actually think about it, it made no sense. They need to put all their eggs on Jason Tatum. So some of these things that I cringe at, I'm like, why did I do that? Or I can't believe it came out that way. It comes from a natural moment, and it's a small mistake, but it's a mistake that's made out of joy, diligence, and care. So I sometimes cringe, but I do look the other way, and I give myself some grace when I make mistakes like that.
Going back to your baseball days with the White Sox and the Dodgers, what's the longest game that you ever had to broadcast?
Whoa, jeez. Oh, there's some doozies, man. This is way before the pitch clock. I don't know offhand, but got to been close to 5 hours. Baseball, and then some of those games had rain delays, and sometimes you get double headers. It was so normal just to kind of think that, you go to the ballpark and you have no idea when the game would end. And no one loves baseball more than me. But I do think that there's something, I think every announcer in Major League Baseball would say, I love baseball, but I'm always hoping for a rain out, or I'm always hoping for a hour and 50-minute game. That's kind of like the thing with baseball. So I don't know the exact time, but I've had some doozies, no doubt about that.
Well, I'm a big fan of the pitch clock myself, and a big fan of baseball. So, thinking
It's
about,
I just want to delve off on that. We were so conditioned to say, "Oh no, baseball has to be a certain way. We can't have any new." It's great. The pitch clock is fantastic, and I don't want to. I know your last name is Elam. I'm telling you, I think we're way too far down that road just because people are so conservative what they think sports are supposed to be. But it's not too late. I'm telling you, it wasn't that long ago. It was 1980 that they instituted the 3-point line. And now we just can't imagine the game without it. But it's in our lifetimes that they just decided to do it. It's not too late to have an Elam Ending. I'm telling you, I'm preaching to the choir, or whatever, other way around. but it's not too late to have an Elam Ending. I've seen it enough times to know that is the future, if anyone wants to try.
I truly believe in my heart of hearts that it's going to happen somehow, some way, and it's just the only question is when and in what path it's going to take to finally take hold at the
It's the
highest
best way
levels
to
of
end a
play.
game. No doubt about it. I've done so many games with you.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't want to be too self-indulgent. So bringing it back to some interesting moments throughout your career, interesting experiences you might have had as a sideline reporter in baseball or doing play-by-play in basketball. What's scarier, the possibility of being hit with a line drive or the possibility of a player barreling over the scorer's table or the broadcast table in an NBA game?
I've never really felt the danger of being hit by a ball. I was a sideline reporter, but I was always kind of running around the stadium and never really worried too much about it. In the booth, this is the only way you're going to get hit with a ball is that some lollipop that comes back and you basically fall off your seat because you're so afraid. But getting bowled over is real. I remember I was a sideline reporter for the Bulls back in the '90s, and I was sitting courtside right beneath the basket. And I think Michael had retired for he'd left. It was his second retirement, his final retirement from Chicago, and the Bulls were kind of going with a different direction. And the Bulls had Brad Miller from Fort Wayne, and Brad Miller was our center, and we were playing. I think it probably would have been the Lakers at the time. Maybe it was still I think it was Lakers because Shaquille was out there, and Shaquille O'Neal got into a dust up with Brad Miller. And the next thing I know, like they're on my lap. I was sitting in the first row right underneath the basket stanchion. And they were these two huge guys, 350-pound Shaquille O'Neal and 260-pound Brad Miller just start rolling onto this table. And I've never been more afraid in an athletic venue than that particular time. Made it out alive clearly, but that is a definite hellcatcher. Shaquille O'Neal when he's enraged and Brad Miller when he's provoking him.
That reminds me of a time working on the Cincinnati Reds grounds crew. I almost ended up in the middle of a fight between Anthony Rizzo and Matt Latos. But
goodness.
At least those guys weren't quite as big as Shaquille O'Neal. That would have been much
You working
scarier,
in the
I'm sure.
grounds crew in Cincinnati?
Yes, multi-talented guy.
And it's not that long ago because Anthony Rizzo just started playing like in 2009 or 10 or so.
Yeah.
Love it.
So in your time, very early in your career as a sideline reporter with the Bulls, as you mentioned, you had the truly unique opportunity to hone your skills by interviewing Michael Jordan on a regular basis. Is there a time or is there a question that you still think about that you wish that you feel dumb for asking him that you wish you could take back?
They kind of all were dumb. Yeah, I was kind of young when I got the opportunity and I was so green. But they gave me this opportunity. I was right place at the right time. I'd obviously put in a ton of work. I'd been a news reporter in Rochester, New York before. I'd done minor league baseball. But I kind of just got thrown into this thing. And the Bulls were going after their sixth championship. And I was the last person in. I didn't really know anyone. And I didn't really think that it was my role to kind of ingratiate myself quickly and just be one of the buddies. I just was going to do my job and get out. So I only dealt with Michael with a microphone in my hand. I never would say, "Hey, Michael, what do you think about this?" We never had any behind the scenes relationship back then. But there were so many times that I would ask him kind of questions. And as I was doing it, I was so young, he could see my eyes probably darting back and forth because I was nervous. And he was so gracious. He always just understood either what I wanted to ask him or he just said, "You know what, kid, that's a crappy question. I'm going to give you the response that I want." But the way that he handled me with kid gloves, I'll always be respectful of, and it was definitely noted because he could have big leagued me. He could have done a lot of different things to make my life uncomfortable or nasty, or even get rid of me. And he gave me a wide berth and always said nice things about me publicly. And he changed my career, man. Just being associated with those Bulls back in the late '90s and being able to watch how a professional like Michael Jordan carried himself, that changed the path of my career, no doubt about it.
He's the greatest for many reasons. How many champagne showers and Gatorade baths have you been in the middle of?
uh, Not as many as you'd think. Actually, there's been a couple that I wasn't involved in. I was kind of ready. I remember I was with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and we're on the road. And I used to do the games on the road, and Vince Scully would do the games at home. And we're in, I want to say Pittsburgh, tail end of the season, and the Dodgers need to get a win to clinch a playoff spot. And so we're coming up with all these different scenarios, what we're going to do. It's the beginning of a 3-game series in Pittsburgh. And at the time, the Pirates are not great. And so anyway, we have in the locker room, there's all the plastic up and everyone's ready to go. And the Dodgers are the heartbreaker on Friday. The Dodgers have a lead on Saturday, and they don't do it. With the entire 3-game series, they had a chance to clinch, and they never did. So I was already had this scenario. I was going to run down to the clubhouse and talk to the guys and do our thing, and it actually never happened. So that's my most recent non-experience with the champagne. And I owned the Hornets now for 11 years. They made the playoffs my first year, and that was it. So it's been a while.
Coming down the stretch with Eric Collins. When you were attending St. Lawrence University, you played basketball there. Is that correct?
I did. I played 1 year, my freshman year.
Can you think back to your time as an athlete, whether it was that time as a basketball player at St. Lawrence or some other sport, some other time in your life? Is there one play, one moment of glory that you remember more than any other?
There wasn't a lot of glory. I do remember, just because for some reason to this day, I love free throws. I just think free throws are like one of the coolest things, just because at every level of basketball, men, women, kids, college, high school, pros, the line's the same. There's no wind, there's no defense, and it's an easy shot. Like these guys, people make thousands in a row. It's not that unheard of to look at the Guinness Book of World Records and some guy, makes whatever 10,000 in a 12-hour window. So I love free throws, and when I do think of the last days of me ever playing competitive basketball, I was on the JV team at St. Lawrence, which is Division III, way upstate New York, and we would play other JV teams. That's kind of the way that worked back then. Is that if you were at St. Lawrence, you play the JV team for Potsdam or Clarkson or Ithaca, and then if you were okay, then the next year you beat maybe on the varsity or whatever. So I was on the JV team with the St. Lawrence basketball team my freshman year. Loved it, met people. It's great. But I remember getting fouled. We're playing at Hamilton College, which is in Clinton, New York. And I remember I got fouled and I made the shot and I had to go to the free throw line. It was like my only time I had a 3-point play. And it's like, I got to make this free throw. I just got to make it. And I pured it. It was fantastic. And at the end of the year, okay, I'll never forget, I was 10 of 11 at the free throw line. 10 out of 11. I shot over 90% at the free throw line. Clearly limited time. But for someone who loves free throws as much as I do, I have eternal pride, and my chest is always going to be puffed out because my last year of basketball, I shot over 90% of the free throw line.
Well, I was tempted to ask you to give an Eric Collins call of your greatest moment of glory, but if it was a free throw, I don't know how great it would be. I don't know if it would capture the Eric Collins style.
I couldn't dribble at all, but if I picked up the ball, I could make a shot. But I couldn't make a shot from behind the line. This was like the infant stages of 3-point line. I was money from like one step inside the line. So I was the king of the 17-footer, but I couldn't put the ball on the ground or do anything else. It was the strangest game. So.
Yeah, and if you lived with those 17-footers, you'd never make it in today's NBA.
No.
Sorry. You're a father of young women, and I'm also the father of a daughter who's 2 years old at the time of this recording. What advice do you have out there for the girl dads?
Oh, I include them in everything. Like I used to tell my girls, and I'm not sure that this would be in like Benjamin Spott's book of parenting, but I include them in everything. And I remember vividly saying when they were kids, I was like, I'm not going to say no. Whatever you want. In terms of if you ever want someone to play with, if you want to shoot a ball, if you want to play catch, your dad will never be the one who says no. Let's do it. And so for years and years and years, I would be the most tired person in the history of the world, but I never let go of a moment. If they wanted to play catch, if they wanted me to throw them batting practice, if they wanted me to shag balls, it was always yes. That was kind of my thing. And I don't regret a moment. And I've got so many different memories with my girls over the years. And to me, that was a mistake. Now, maybe it doesn't work for everyone, but that was not a mistake. I wanted to share everything with my girls, and I have been able to so far.
I love that. The last question is, when the story of Eric Collins' career is written and we flip to the acknowledgments section, other than family, who are going to be some of the people in there that you credit for your success in your career?
Wow. I actually think about this quite often. Thank you for asking, because I do want to kind of just get this out of my brain. I can think of 3 people that were massive to me. Like obviously my mom was just an incredibly important person. My mom, no one loved sports more than my mother. My dad is the polar opposite, classical music, headphones on, had a baton in his hand. He was kind of this wonderful guy, but in a totally different way. My mom was the huge sports fan that instilled it in me. But when I was a kid, there was a sports anchor in Cleveland, Ohio, named Wayland Boot. And I don't think history probably many people won't remember Wayland Boot. But no matter what I was doing at 11:20 every single night, I dropped what I was doing to get in front of a television and watch Wayland Boot's sportscast. This guy was so distinctive. He had a language that just I'd never heard of before and blew me away. He would say things like, "Last night the Indians looked worse than a fat man in a tight suit," or "The Cavaliers are playing; they look worse than mustard and angel food cake," or "The Browns are hotter than a tailpipe." And it just, I was like, whoa, every single thing that he said made it so engaging. And I'll never forget it. Wayland Boot was a massive guy. I moved to Chicago, and when I wanted to get into TV, I was befriended by this guy named Warner Saunders, who I met before, who may have been the most regal, elegant, erudite man. And he instilled in me this ability to work with others and the importance of representing yourself in a certain way. Love Warner Saunders, passed away a couple of years ago, but he was so important to me. And another guy who's passed is a guy named Chet Kopic, who people may remember. Chet Kopic was a longtime radio and television personality based in Chicago, but he was just this big, bombastic guy. I remember I'd walk with him. He did a fur coat in Chicago in June, going to finals games just because he wanted to wear a fur coat in June. And we would walk into the United Center together, and people would say, Chet, Chet, and just read his name. And he'd say, Eric, never look at one particular person. Look at the entire section. So just silly stuff about how he carried himself. But the fact that he didn't take himself too seriously, and he was doing such a radically different thing than everyone else. And he just would put himself out there and was not afraid. Like the fearlessness I always take from Chet Kopic. So those three guys, those three gentlemen have been my professional mentors: Wayland Boot, Warner Saunders, and Chet Kopic.
Well, thank you so much, Eric Collins, for joining us today. I also want to say before we sign off that, again, bringing it back to the Elam Ending, this is something, a concept way before it was even called that, back in 2007, that I dreamed about, wanted to see it get off the ground, never knew how long or when it would ever get off the ground. I didn't know that it would take 10 full years before it would ever be implemented for the first time ever at TBT, the basketball tournament. And then a few years later, you started calling their games. But all those years when I could only see and hear these games in my own mind because there was no opportunity to see them in real life, I always wondered what these moments, these Elam Ending games and moments would sound like. And even in my best and most optimistic envisionings of what those moments would sound like, it still never sounded quite as good as what you've made it sound like in your calls of these games on TBT. And I appreciate that. So thank you so much, Eric Collins. It's been a joy to chat with you today. And thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure, Nick. Thank you.
In the innovation segment, we discuss innovations, good and bad, in the world of sports. And most times these will be innovations as they apply to playing rule changes, on-field, on-court playing rules. But they can be innovations of any kind. And these can be innovations at all different phases of implementation, too. They can be some that have already been implemented, others that have been agreed upon or voted on and will be implemented, others that are in advanced talks or just at the stage of being publicly floated for the first time. These could be ideas that are original ideas of my own, or the most exciting kind are ideas for innovations that are submitted by you. And we encourage you to submit those ideas by email, which is nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com. You can also submit ideas for innovations by X or Instagram @sportsrulepod. The innovation to discuss today is the concept of choose your own adventure playoffs, where the top teams in the playoffs get to choose their opponent and also their placement in the bracket and their path to ultimately a championship. Now, this is not an original idea of mine necessarily. We've actually seen many high schools do this for their playoff system, although they do it in a kind of a clumsy way. I think there should actually be done in an opposite, reverse kind of a way. And we certainly haven't seen this at top levels of play in sports, the idea of choose your own adventure playoffs. So what problem does this solve? Well, if you think about the entire spirit of a seeding system and playoffs, it's meant to reward the top teams for their regular season performance by giving them a more favorable path to the championship. And sometimes it does that, but not always. We see many instances where the seeding system in various sports does not necessarily give the top teams the most favorable path that they've earned. So this is a way to do that because there's a more effective and really a more fun way of giving those top teams the most favorable path, and that's to let them choose it themselves rather than basing it on a predetermined seeding system. So just a few of the ways that the current seeding systems provide matchups that aren't necessarily the most favorable for the top teams is, if you think about the NBA, you might have a team that just sneaks into the playoffs and is one of the lowest seeds, but maybe they're getting one of their superstars back from injury, and they're a scary matchup for a top team. You think about in Major League Baseball, where a team that might just sneak into the playoffs, maybe they have one of the most dominant individual pitchers in the game, and you might not want to face that starting pitcher if you're one of the top teams. In the NFL, we see the impact of geography and really small divisions, really creating these rankings, these seeding rankings that give undeserving teams more favorable matchups than teams that are better than those. And then even once the playoff field is set, sometimes these seeding systems don't really know how much priority to place on travel, because in some cases, a team might not want to travel. They might even be willing to have a less favorable matchup if it reduces their travel. Others might have a different philosophy. They might be willing to travel as far as it takes to get the most favorable matchup. But it's better to let the teams decide how much they want to prioritize travel than just hoping that an arbitrary and predetermined seating system matches it up for them. So not only is this effective from a practical standpoint, but I really do believe that choose your own adventure playoffs could also bring a cool factor with it. That combination of being practical and cool is what makes some of the best innovations, and I'll talk about some of those cool aspects here in a moment. But because of that combination of being practical, being cool, solving a problem, just making things better, is why I believe on a scale of 0 to 10, how good of an idea this is. For me, this is a 10 all the way. You could possibly say for one particular sport that I'll talk about, it could be a 9 just because it will affect the way things are done currently a little more than others. But an idea that I truly believe in, and it's something that I talked about in an interview with Jeff Passan in 2018 in an article about different ideas for baseball, some of which I still believe in, others I don't believe in so much. But this is one that I really, truly believe in. And also when I go on podcasts, which usually begin to address the Elam ending for basketball, in many cases they'll ask me, what would I change about other sports? This is my go-to answer. I really believe that a choose your own adventure playoff system would work in most, if not all, sports and could be implemented fairly soon. Now, in February of 2020, Major League Baseball actually publicly floated this concept of a playoff draft. Essentially, they were also proposing to combine that with an expansion of the playoffs to 7 teams per league. But they were floating this publicly, saying that one team in each league would get a bye, and then the number 2 seed would be able to choose their first round opponent. The number 3 seed would be able to choose their first round opponent from the remaining teams. But just after they floated that in February 2020, obviously within the next month, because of the COVID pandemic, that idea was tabled, and it really hasn't reemerged to wide discussion since then. Now, to get in the weeds a little bit about how this would work procedurally, so if it's a playoff bracket that happens to have byes in it, first you would start with the top seed and see if they want a bye or if they'd rather play a first round matchup. In almost all cases, they'll probably choose the bye, but there could be situations like in Major League Baseball, some teams don't want to have that layoff. They might actually choose to have a first round matchup. So, but anyway, you'd first check down the line and see who actually wants the byes. And then once that's settled, then you would start with the top team and see who they would want to play in their first round matchup. And you'd go to the next team from among the remaining teams they would choose. And you would keep going until there are now all of your first round matchups set. They're still kind of floating in space. They haven't settled into a space in the bracket, but then you start right back up at the top and look at second round matchups. Which potential second round matchup would the top team want? And then look at the number 2 seed and so on. And then once you go through enough rounds, then it basically locks in the way the bracket would work. Some smaller playoff systems, such as Major League Baseball, this would go relatively quickly. And then you'd have some, such as the NCAA tournament, where you'd have several rounds before the playoff bracket would come into place. Now, one additional practical advantage, and this is specific to college basketball, you think about all the different considerations that the NCAA selection committee has to think about when they're putting the bracket together. It's hard enough to decide which teams are in and where they line up in a 1 to 68 ranking. But in addition to that, when actually putting the bracket together, the selection committee has to think about things such as geography. They have to think about special considerations based on needs of that particular university for scheduling. They have to think about conference affiliation. They have to think about whether there are previous matchups. They have to think about how teams are playing going into the tournament, the last 10 games, or the injury status of players, and just so many things on top of the fundamental responsibility of determining who's in and where they rank among all the teams in the tournament. You would be taking all that extra burden off of that selection committee and putting it on the teams. How much do they want to prioritize travel or proximity for their own fans? How much do they want to prioritize whether there's been a previous matchup or not? How much do they want to prioritize the way that a team is playing going into the tournament? Leave it up to them to decide what of those go into a favorable matchup for them. And in addition to the practical side, one extra advantage from a cool standpoint, and I think this is honestly maybe the most exciting part, is that you could conduct these drafts in a made-for-TV type of special event, and it would add so much intrigue going into a playoffs because every one of the lower teams is going to have to be picked by someone for their matchup, and that automatically provides bulletin board material and just intrigue going into the matchup. And then every upset that happens, once it happens after the fact for a team that was chosen for that matchup, if they go on to beat the team that chose them, there's lasting intrigue and lasting memory and lasting satisfaction for beating the team that chose you. It's from a cool standpoint, being able to present it that way in a made-for-TV special and then just add the storylines to it is something that should not be overlooked, and it shouldn't be missed out on. Now, thinking about possible downsides, there's no definite downside. There are some things that are worth considering, though. I don't see a definite downside in terms of dollars and cents. In fact, I think sponsorship opportunities and just engagement opportunities would be a boon from a dollars and cents standpoint for just about any league that implements this. I also think that thinking about how things might play out down the stretch of a regular season, if there's a relatively large playoff field and you're looking at teams that are clustered in the middle, they're safely into the playoffs, but there's clustered in the middle as far as where they might finish in the standings. Those races might not have the same intrigue that they currently have. And I'm thinking about a league such as the NBA, where you have however you want to look at it, 8 to 10 teams in each conference. You might have some of the teams that are clustered around the middle kind of coasting to the finish line. But I would say that those races in the middle of a playoff pack aren't really intriguing that much currently anyway. Now, the races at the top of the playoff field are intriguing, and certainly the races just to get into the playoff field are always intriguing. And I think they would be just as intriguing even if you were to put in choose your own adventure playoffs. Also thinking about it from the standpoint of college basketball specifically, and this is why I think maybe it only ranks as a 9 on the scale of 0 to 10 on whether this is a good idea, is that you would probably have to turn that draft process into a full day event because it would just take so much time to get through all the possible matchups just in the first round alone, but then building potential second, third matchups all the way until you have a full bracket. There'll probably be a full day event. And currently, the way that the college basketball calendar is scheduled is you've got a handful of conference championship games early on Sunday, leading right up until the selection show, which starts in the early evening. You might have to finish the conference tournament action on Saturday and allow the selection committee to determine which teams are in and where they rank one to last by early on Sunday, and then let and then proceed with a draft that lasts all throughout the day on Sunday. But that might actually be an exciting thing. Maybe people would embrace that change. And then the tournament itself would also have just so much more intrigue. And then the other possibility of a possible downside, but I don't see this as a deal breaker at all, is I think in many leagues, you could see that draft process proceeding relatively in a chalky fashion. You might just have the top teams picking the teams that are at the very bottom of the standings. But even in that case, again, they're actually going through the process of selecting that team. That team is going to have extra motivation, that lower seeded team, to beat the team that chose them. And even if, no matter how it turns out, that top team has waived their right to complain about their matchup, whereas currently under many seeding systems, they might have a legitimate right to complain that they got matched up to a tough matchup in the first round. There are a couple other things to think about in terms of variations. I don't necessarily favor these, but you could potentially redraft after each round of the playoffs. That would even reward top regular season performance even more, because the team with that top record, after each round, they're getting to recalibrate and reassess who their most favorable matchup would be. And also there's the variation where in leagues where they're separated into two separate leagues or conferences, whatever, there is the option you could just get rid of leagues and conferences entirely. You wouldn't necessarily have to do that, but that's one possible variation too. So to recap, choose your own adventure playoffs. It's a good idea. It's a good idea from a practical standpoint, because again, the idea of seeding systems is to reward the top teams for their regular season performance and provide a more favorable playoff matchup and path. But there's a more effective way to do it by letting them choose that path on their own. And not only is this concept cool or good from a practical standpoint, but it's just very, very cool also by adding all the different storylines that come along with it, having a made-for-TV event and conducting that draft. Someone is going to do this idea. It appeared that Major League Baseball was going to be the first to do it. They've cooled off on that idea, but someone is going to do this, and they're going to set a trend throughout the sports world where others follow. I truly believe that. The next to last thing we'll do in this episode is to acknowledge a next to last from the past. And in most cases, this will be a next to last from the world of sports, the next to last game, play, inning, drive, something like that. But it could also be occasionally a next to last from pop culture, an episode or an album, or even from the world of news. Now, in the 2014 World Series, the very last at bat was a foul pop-up off the bat of Royals catcher Salvador Perez that was caught by San Francisco Giants third baseman Pablo Sandoval and was thrown by Giants pitcher Madison Bumgarner to end the game and end the World Series in Game 7, with the Giants winning the game by a 3-2 score. That stranded the tying run on third base, and the way that runner got on third base is the subject of this next to last. Now, as an avid sports fan of all sports for many years, I've watched countless games over the years as a fan, and even so, there's been relatively very few instances that have made me literally jump out of my chair. And the next to last at bat of the 2014 World Series did exactly that, when Alex Gordon, the Royals left fielder, stepped up to the plate in a 3-2 game, 2 outs, bases empty in the bottom of the 9th inning. Now, as a lifelong baseball fan, I've wondered what would be the most exciting possible scenario or at bat in a baseball game. And what my mind had settled on for a long time before this game was the possibility that I'd never seen before and didn't really think there was a realistic chance of seeing that. But that was the possibility that someone could circle the bases on a ball that was still in play with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th or a later inning with a chance to tie or take the lead in a game to win the game. That was almost what happened on that night in 2014. So Alex Gordon hit a line drive to left center field that the Giants center fielder Gregor Blanco thought he had a chance to catch. And in fact, if you also look at Madison Bumgarner and Giants catcher Buster Posey, they thought he had a chance to catch that ball too. They were starting to celebrate at the pitcher's mound area. But Blanco checked up, once he realized he wasn't going to be able to catch that ball, and the ball bounced at his feet and skipped by him and rolled all the way to the wall. And by this point already, we know that this is a wacky play. We just don't know how it's going to end. Now, Giants left fielder Juan Perez made a heads-up play, maybe a season-saving play by backing up the ball that rolled all the way to the wall. But even he had his own struggles as he went out to retrieve the ball. He fumbled it, and the ball rolled about 5 feet away from him just as Alex Gordon was rounding second base. And now this is where the play, once he fumbled that ball, really became worthy of jumping out of one's chair, because you thought there was a realistic chance that Alex Gordon was going to circle the bases. The ball was rolling by itself out at the base of the wall as you have a runner approaching third base. But Juan Perez was able to pick up the ball and throw it into the Giants shortstop, Brandon Crawford, who was out fairly far into left center field, and scooped the ball on a tricky short hop right as Gordon was reaching third base. And Royals third base coach Mike Jershely made the decision to hold up Alex Gordon at third. Now, we will never know how that play might have turned out. It was probably the right decision to hold him there, because an online throw and an on-target throw by Crawford would have certainly gotten Alex Gordon out by a significant margin at the plate. But if that throw was offline at all, then Alex Gordon would have had a real chance to circle the bases and possibly go down as the most exciting play in the history of baseball by tying Game 7 with 2 outs in the ninth in that fashion. And even if the throw was a little offline and they were still able to get Gordon on a close play, if that was the way that the World Series ended, that would possibly go down as the most exciting play in the history of baseball. Now, that next to last at bat of the 2014 World Series will leave Royals fans always wondering what would have happened if they had sent Alex Gordon home on that play. But fortunately for Royals fans, they didn't have to wait long to know how it felt to win the World Series, as they came back in 2015 and defeated the New York Mets in 5 games. And the last thing I'd like to do today is to thank all of you for your engagement in the Sports Rule Pod. Remember, if you have an idea for an innovative rule change or any sort of idea or innovation in the world of sports that you'd like for me to scrutinize on a future episode, you can submit that idea by email, nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com, or at X or Instagram at sportsrulepod. Please like and subscribe wherever you follow the podcast. Look for Season 1 episodes to be released every 2 weeks on Friday mornings, and we'll see you next time.